Oh wow, I can't wait until next Tyrannical bolstering explosive week is active. There was a team that timed the world first 28 on that week, so the Affix set must be very good.
Well, you only have 11 weeks to wait until we get back there. Of course, here is the Affix calendar. We now have the full rotation of what the affixes are. And so this video, we're going to talk about that calendar, which is quite different from previous seasons. And of course, let's start though by talking about, as you said, that world first plus 28. Several more have since been done this week on this good fortified week, rather than on this tyrannical bolstering week where you can see that lone tyrannical affix in the 28s there. That was indeed world first. So huge congratulations to that team. That's Andy Brew, Banner, you know, bunch of high-end European gamers.
Yes, Speed, Wildy, Vihu. Yeah, a bunch of just high-end, very strong European players. Four of the people were on Team Sheesh from the Great Push, if you remember them. So it's no surprise that they were able to time the world first 28. I mean, I guess the most impressive thing was their composition. I think a lot of it, not many people expecting Prot Pally Restoration Shaman.
Yeah, it's a wombo combo. Just think about how many interrupts you have, right? Most groups are just sitting there with like a tank interrupt. This group's just tossing out shields, tossing out wind shears. No casts ever getting through, I'm sure.
Well, a lot of it too is that they're playing like a composition that doesn't require you to pull around cooldowns as much as like some of the other popular things like Balance Druid and Guardian Druid require you to do. And even Holy Paladin with Ashen Hollow, all three of those require you to pull around CDs in some form or fashion. But they're running a comp that doesn't have any of that. They have like high consistent damage, and they did a very
huge
standard
target.
Yeah,
right? Like,
they did a standard hold W route straight through this dungeon.
Yeah, of course, you know, some people may not quite be used to doing it yet, but if you get really good, you can just look at that code and sort of get an idea of what they were pulling by where all the little letters are and stuff. So yeah, you can see very standard path through the dungeon.
Okay, well, you put this in your MDT, you see what they pulled, right?
Join us next week when it'll be like librarians in elementary school where they would read out the URL to you. So we'll read you out the route text to just type into your MDT.
You can go pull this up on your own MDT if you want to go look at what they did. I guess it also was interesting that they also pulled the red slimes into both Globgrog and Stradama. That saved them a lot of time. That gives them the haste buff. It was actually insane how they were able to pull this off.
Well, I mean, the comp is very heavy single target damage, right? You don't have your Holy Paladin, so you're not doing massive, you know, Ashen DPS, but it's a 28 key. You know, your tank's a Prot Pally, healing them is great anyways, and they're a Prot Pally, they're doing a lot of damage anyways. And then you have the Sub-Rogue Frost Mage as well, and just all of those bolstering pulls it's just like there's an annoying mob that has more health than the other stuff. Those two are always just doing so much damage to that one target. And then even AoE that needs to get done, your Windwalker just is carrying the whole thing. The comp actually really makes a lot of sense when you kind of break it down to how they're all covering each other's weaknesses.
All right. Well, with that said, the world first 28 was done on a Tyrannical weekend, not even a good one. It was also bolstering. And so this has people questioning how bad is Tyrannical really? And I think you have some stats?
Well, so this sort of follows as well from the Great Push, right? Where also the best keys and several world first keys were done last season during the Great Push on the Tyrannical dungeons they chose, right? Like the two Tyrannical keys were the two where we saw world's highest keys done in the Great Push. Yeah, so I ended up diving through some old Raider IO runs and looking at the 1 millionth best run, both this season and last season. And in both this season and last season, they were basically the same. But things changed a lot as you got better than the 1 millionth best run. So in both of those seasons, the millionth best run was a plus 15 key. In this season, if you instead cut that down by a factor of 10, right, you bring it to the 100,000th best run, then again, it's the same, right? Both Tyrannical and Fortified are both on a plus 20 key level. You cut it down to the 10,000th best run, Tyrannical and Fortified both on a plus 22 key level. And it actually stays pretty clear all the way until you start getting up into the top 1,000, the top 100 best runs, where Fortified does start to represent a bigger fraction of those top runs. If you go back to last season, however, the difference becomes much starker, much sooner. So that 100,000th best run, which this season is a 20 for both affixes, it was a 19 for Fortified last season, and it was a 17 for Tyrannical the season in last season. And if you get up to the 100 or the 10,000th best run, it was a 20 for Tyrannical and a 22 for Fortified. So keys were 2 levels easier basically at that high end. You know, once you started getting into the not just the 15 level, but above it. That was true last season, not true statistically this season. Now, there are a lot of potential reasons for this. One argument that I think you're going to advance is that it's not so much about the fortified and tyrannical, but it's that the supporting cast, right? They've moved all the nasty
Yeah.
stuff next to fortified, and so if you corrected for that, maybe you'd see, oh well, fortified is being saddled by these really tough supporting affixes now that it wasn't in the past.
Yeah, I think that like there is one pretty good fortified week. It's the week that we're currently on. It's this fortified. This is fortified bursting storming week. This week, very good for pushing keys. If you're looking to push the absolute highest level, this is probably going to be one of the better affix sets. But a lot of these tyrannical weeks are very strong. Like this tyrannical raging volcanic week, that is like a top tier week as well. And then this tyrannical bursting volcanic week, also very strong. But I think if you start comparing the fortified versus tyrannical in isolation, I mean, it still is longer. The difference is that I would say that for a large majority of the player base, a lot of these tyrannical weeks are easier to play, though. Like having to play bolstering, very challenging. Honestly, having to play necrotic, also very difficult. And then some of the inspiring weeks are also brutal if you're not very prepared at a top tier level.
It's worth noting, though, you're saying that as like oh, this is fortified is tough for this reason, but it's fortified and tyrannical are equal on that basis this season, whereas they weren't before, right? Previously, all of the necrotic weeks and all of the bolstering weeks were tyrannical, and all the raging weeks.
Yes.
Those all were tyrannical weeks. This season is 50-50. So
That's
it's not like tyrannical is now just getting none of those, right? It's actually being divided evenly. Yeah, I'm pretty on board with the two being actually very comparable most of the way up. Maybe, just maybe at the very top end, there's a slight easier quality for fortified, but I kind of suspect that next week, this tyrannical raging volcanic week, we are going to see some incredibly high keys pushed as well. And I think that when we look at that Raider.io front page in 2 weeks time, it's going to be like 50-50, 60-40 between week number 1 on this calendar and week number 2, which are definitely the two best weeks on the calendar.
Completely anecdotally, it does feel like the bosses this expansion as a whole, and bosses in Mythic Plus in general, are normally pretty difficult to manage and difficult to deal with. And so like the shorter that they will be, the easier of a time you will generally have in the dungeon as a whole. Plus, if you wipe to a boss versus wiping to trash, one of those is substantially more costly than the other, just as a general rule. But those are obviously those are very anecdotal points. Those are not even like pure number points.
Yeah. And just like for high key teams, but also especially for weekly keys, it's so much nicer to only have like a couple of points of difficulty in the whole dungeon, right? Like if oh, we've got to do Hakar good, right? Oh, we've got to do the first boss of Sanguine Depths good, right? And you have to do that. You have all your cooldowns for it, and it's like a fight that you just practice. In a lot of ways, that is a lot easier than fortified, where every single trash pull is pretty deadly. And I think, especially as you get down to those low keys, Tyrannical ends up being a much more like a much less scary affix at that like plus 15 key level. But I think it does kind of hold true all the higher up this season than last season.
I will say that the supporting affixes are very annoying to play for a lot of these weeks, and so it pushes players off even attempting to play them, where they like it's like what you said about the Great Push earlier. They are absolutely doable on Tyrannical with those affixes, but it's like, why would I subject myself to having to play something that it almost consumes twice the amount of effort and twice the mental strain just to play something like, oh gosh, what is the worst Tyrannical week? Maybe the Spiteful Necrotic one is pretty bad. I think that, yeah, it's like, why would you play Tyrannical Spiteful Necrotic? Why would you subject yourself to even playing a Necrotic week at all? As opposed to just like waiting a couple weeks for something that is more friendly to come around. And so that is definitely a confirmation bias thing, where people won't put in their maximum effort on weeks that are more challenging, at least, or more strenuous in terms of like what you have to do to be successful. Instead, they'll just wait for the things that are easier to play.
Yeah, for those players that are like push oriented, this week number 1 and week number 2 on this calendar are certainly the ones. And so that's ongoing right now. And then it is kind of a desert for for kind of the rest of the calendar. Little oasis there with like, fortified raging explosive, tyrannical bursting volcanic, kind of another little oasis. and then kind of back into desert land. For
This
weekly key players,
this
though, like for
this one's
good,
also not bad. Segment storming.
yeah, I would say that a lot of these weeks are pretty doable if you're trying to push score, right? Like if you're just trying to push like 2K for
Oh,
Keystone
that's easy.
Master,
Easy.
well, easy, but like I think that there's less variance between how like there are some weeks that they've had in the past that have been nasty even for that, and this calendar it's pretty favorable for that objective, right? Like I don't know, maybe the fortified bolstering week is gonna catch a lot of groups. Maybe the fortified necrotic week is gonna catch a lot of groups off guard, but other than that, I think that there's most of the weeks on this calendar are fine candidates to go and collect your 2K score for any players that have that as their goal, which is good because I don't think that would have been as true last season.
This is okay. So I've been doing the This Week in Mythic Plus series for a while. There have been no S tier dungeons this whole entire season until this week. This is the first calendar week that I've been doing it. This is I think it's the 8th or 9th week that I've been doing it, so I didn't even get this first round of Tyrannical Raging Volcanic. But this is the first week that I've even assessed that there is a desire for an S tier dungeon. All of the other weeks, there have been a large amount of A's, very few F's. I think that the vast majority of the F's come with like bolstering the other side is normally just like an F because of the nature of that dungeon. And this fortified sanguine necrotic week was pretty
Dude,
bad.
That week was harsh.
Actually,
Those are harsh affixes to put together. That reminds me when they put bursting necrotic together at the end of BFA. That was a fun time.
I actually didn't even put any dungeons in F for sanguine necrotic. Everything was like C and D. Like F is like I would advise you to come back next week. Level of please don't step foot in this dungeon.
I remember like man, there were some last expansion right where it was like shrine sieges with the wrong affixes, and you were just like you know what? Never mind. I'll go do something else.
Bolstering DOS is still at that level. There are some Theater of Pain sets that are pretty bad, but infrequently are they don't zone into this dungeon level bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think to Blizzard's credit, they've been tweaking around the edges of the Mythic Plus, experience a lot this expansion. If you look at the total number of like dungeon hotfixes that have come out and affix hotfixes that have come out, and especially the ones on the way in 9.1.5, the nerfs to Raging Necrotic bolstering, I think all of that is a really good sign, especially towards kind of making it so that there aren't these trends that are different. Like where previously maybe Tyrannical and Fortified were working at that plus 15 level and were broken above it, and they're kind of no longer turning a blind eye to situations like that. Which I think is really cool. And it's important that works both ways. It's important that it doesn't just focus on the high keys at the detriment of the plus 15 key level. But I think being able to do both is really good news.
So ultimately, do you think that Tyrannical is about the same level as Fortified this season?
Yeah, I would say that for almost all purposes, they're pretty close. With maybe the one caveat that like fun wise, I still have a lot more fun on a fortified week because like at the 4th minute of a Mythic Plus boss fight, I'm falling asleep. But other than that, like in terms of all stuff you can track with like metrics, I think they're within like a margin of error that is very reasonable balance wise.
Yeah, I think I think the fun like lengthy boss fight wise, I think that's actually something that is a tangible issue, but it's not like
it's really hard to quantify that.
Exactly, because it's interesting that your stats you had them like being so even for so long, because I felt like it just in general, if you wipe on a tyrannical boss, you are infinitely more punished than if you wipe on a fortified boss, just because of how much time you're going to end up sinking into that boss relative. But it's impressive to note that it doesn't really matter up until like you get to the 5,000 range.
It's interesting because even at the plus 20 keys that I was looking at, right, I was comparing those plus 20s from the 100,000th best Tyrannical and Fortified runs this season. The Fortified runs were slower than the Tyrannical ones at that key level. That flipped at the 22 key level, but it was still true actually that Tyrannical was the better affix, quote unquote, at the 100,000th best key level, which is definitely a big departure from the data that you would find if you ran this for any previous season going all the way at least back to Legion. I don't know what the Legion stats looked like. I'm not sure if they're even still there, but that was what I found.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously those stats are like just tyrannical only, just fortified only stats, right? They're not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. You click like all fortified affixes at the top, and then you just go and you screw with the URL to the little number at the end. Yeah, and you can go and play around with this all yourself if you want in the on Raider.io.
Yeah. It's interesting. I wonder how it's going to progress. I wonder if this is going to be, so say there is like a second great push or something like that, how it will be different in that case. Because a lot of it was interesting because some of the easier dungeons that you can push up a lot higher, such as the Necrotic Wakes, the Plague Falls, the Halls of Atonements, were given harder affix sets, and the dungeons that are typically deemed harder, because they are harder, like the Theater of Pains and the other sides, were given a little bit easier of a time. And so I wonder if that's going to need to be the case again this season, because it does, I mean, completely anecdotally feel like we have a lot less bad weeks where you're just like, I'm taking the week off, I'm not showing back up.
Yeah, bursting Necrotic Week from BFA season 4. That one was a treat.
Necrotic is still pretty rough. I would say that both bolstering and Necrotic weeks as a whole are like.
We'll see. Though I'm still hopeful that the 9.1.5 changes will bring those closer to being weeks that you'll consider logging in for. We'll see. We have no idea how much more of this calendar we're getting to before 9.1.5 hits. It's worth noting our estimate at this time is that it'll probably stay on that calendar through 9.1.5, and it'll probably keep our position in the calendar. But there have been 0.1.5 patches in the past where it's like reset the calendar and stuff. So it might happen this time. My guess is they probably won't, though.
Well, I mean, there have been 0.5 patches where they've completely removed affixes before, so it just kind of depends.
Overflowing gone too soon. Pour one out for overflowing.
F's in the chat for overflowing. But yes, please comment F's in the description or in the comment section. We need them very bad for our click view retention, algorithm things.
Guys, please, we need it so bad. Tettles got food. He needs to upgrade his food delivery from just bags of trash to actual food.
All right.
For those who don't know that story, check his Twitter.
Okay. Anyways, anything else, Dratnos?
No, I'm assuming I'm getting cut off soon. So
yes, you're getting cut off soon.
Get my words in quick.
Yeah. All right. That's gonna be it for us today. Hope you guys all have a great rest of your day, and we will see you guys later. Goodbye.
Bye.